I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents.
Marking a milestone, 20 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
1 out of 5 Americans has a disability. 1 out of 5.
A practice that was once forbidden becomes more common in the Catholic Church.
The Church prefers entombment, but cremation is allowed.
Plus, a sister act from the 12th century.
Her message of salvation, holistic healing, and sustainability is more urgent today than ever.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. 2 decades ago this week, a bill was signed into law prohibiting discrimination against the disabled. The Americans with Disabilities Act also guarantees disabled people equal opportunity in employment, in transportation, government services, and other areas. But what you may not know is the Catholic Church played a role in the law's passage.
That's right. Supporters of the ADA read excerpts from the U.S. Bishops' Conference pastoral statement on people with disabilities. More than 20 years ago, they're on the floor of the Senate. But now, 2 decades after the bill passed, the question remains, does it go far enough? 20 years and 1 day ago, President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law. Monday, current President Barack Obama marked the occasion at the White House with words of praise for those who overcame their handicaps.
It began when Americans no longer saw their own disabilities as a barrier to their success and set out to tear down the physical and social barriers that were. It became a massive wave of bottom-up change that swept across the country as you refused to accept the world as it was, and when you were told, no, don't try, you can't, you responded with that age-old American creed, yes, we can.
The ADA is credited with smashing barriers and creating opportunities for the disabled. We've all seen its effects: curb cuts and ramps, wider doors in parking spaces, and braille on elevators and ATMs. But is it enough?
Well, I am gratified but impatient.
Former U.S. Attorney General Richard Thornburgh, who helped push the ADA through, says we have not come far enough yet.
Gratified that we've expressed in a formal way through legislative action the importance of the civil rights of people with disabilities and their rights to participate in the mainstream of our lives without being discriminated against. And disappointed in a way because we haven't reached the promised land yet.
1 out of 5 Americans has a disability. 1 out of 5.
Deborah Goncher-Vinnick is an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker in New Jersey. I spoke with her last year about a film she produced called A Place for All, Faith and Community for Persons with Disabilities.
We're all going to, at some point or another, age does that to us, have some sort of disability. It might be that our hearing is going to be less than it is now. It might be that our sight might be less.
Deborah's film deals with access to houses of worship for people with disabilities.
When you have old buildings, for example, we have a problem. There are steps, and these are impediments to people going to pray. And in these economic times, a lot of faith groups are talking about the expense. But this is an expense that needs to be a priority.
But advocates for the disabled say their needs don't stop at having proper access to buildings.
I think one of our challenges as we move into the next decade is how can we create more economic opportunities so that more people with disabilities are working, more people are in the middle class, own their own homes, and are able to participate fully in the mainstream of the economy.
That's something that hits home for Eric Cole. His son Ryan was diagnosed with a brain disorder called Dandy Walker malformation.
Ryan's had 2 brain surgeries. He's had abdominal surgeries to place a G-tube. He's had hernia surgeries. He's had seizures that were brought under control.
Ryan is missing part of his cerebellum, and his parents say they want him to grow up to be self-sufficient. The ADA has made his outlook better than it would have been more than 20 years ago. But Ryan's dad says society still has a long way to go.
I think there are many stereotypes that we still battle today. I think there are some derogatory terms out there that are still used for individuals with cognitive and intellectual disabilities. And understand that individuals like Ryan have hopes and dreams and aspirations just like the rest of us.
Well, stay with us. There's much more Currents coming up.
When we come back, we'll have the day's headlines, including investigators looking for answers in a church roof collapse in upstate New York. Welcome back. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in a bit, catching up with a nun from the Middle Ages in a unique kind of Sister Act. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, a Sister Act from the streets of Brooklyn is dominating the front page of one local newspaper this week. A woman known as the Lying Nun has been subpoenaed by New York State Attorney General Andrew Cuomo following reports in the New York Post that she's been seeking donations for a non-existent orphanage. The Brooklyn woman, Melinda LeGrand, claims to be an Episcopal nun, but her church says she has no accreditation. LeGrand has reportedly been arrested at least once before for running the same scam, panhandling for a Crown Heights church that is, in fact, operated by a convicted rapist. Well, upstate, a church in the Diocese of Syracuse is getting renewed attention following a sudden collapse Sunday. Investigators are trying to determine what caused the roof of St. Louis Catholic Church in Oswego to cave in. No one was injured. Officials in the diocese say they had no idea of any structural problems in the building, which had been closed since 2000. Crews demolished the rest of the church as a precaution.
Well, as plans move forward for Pope Benedict's visit to the United Kingdom, more details are being released about a key part of that trip, the beatification of John Henry Newman. Yesterday, it was announced that the American deacon, whose miraculous healing led to Newman's beatification, will take part in the Mass. Deacon Jack Sullivan from the Archdiocese of Boston will proclaim the gospel at the beatification, set to take place in Birmingham on September 19th. Deacon Sullivan suffered from a serious spinal disorder that was cured in 2001, thanks, he says, to the intercession of Cardinal Newman. At the Vatican, word that the old world is about to meet the new. A landmark containing some priceless ancient works gets set to reopen with some distinctly modern additions. We have a first look from Rome Reports.
The Vatican Library will open its doors again on September 20th after 3 years of intense remodeling. The scaffolding and workers will leave their post to books and scholars, who will find a more modern library with a better security system. The main objective of the remodeling was to improve security in the library to prevent theft or loss. Books will be registered in an electronic system and will contain an identification chip from now on.
Each book is identified by a computer code, a tag with an electronic chip. Then, according to the user, there may be places accessible or forbidden depending on the volume and the person who takes the book.
With the new system, the library will always know who has the books, where they are, and the path taken in the library. It also prevents the person from taking an unavailable volume or from taking it to unauthorized areas or out of the library. Security arches and cameras have been installed in every room.
You cannot leave the library with a book because there are a number of alarms, and in some cases, security arches blocking the exit.
According to the director, the security measures were not made because of a theft. The library only wants to better preserve its nearly 1.6 million volumes and 150,000 manuscripts. Besides the security measures, a new elevator has been built to move manuscripts in a more secure way and to improve the entrance of the more than 150 scholars who come to the library each day. An updated library will unite the latest technologies and ancient works, such as a 4th century Bible, 2 manuscripts of Virgil, and the Divine Comedy painted by Boccaccio. It's a place where scholars from around the world can again reference one-of-a-kind works.
And in other news from the Vatican, a mystery of the church may finally have been solved. The Vatican newspaper last week announced that the art world may have discovered a new work by Caravaggio on the 400th anniversary of his death. The work depicts the martyrdom of St. Lawrence, and experts were baffled because they weren't even aware of its existence. But authorities today said the quality of the painting doesn't hold up. It was likely done by one of Caravaggio's followers. The work will now be subjected to x-rays and other tests to determine just who exactly did paint it. It had been kept for years in a Roman church run by the Jesuits, who called in experts for a closer look while the painting was being cleaned.
It's like one of those things you take it on the, to the Antique Roadshow or something, right. And they say, "Oh no, this is not quite what you think it is." It's one of those situations.
But you never know; it could be, and then you have $15 million find or something.
I know. Yeah, exactly. But it is a very rare find anyway. Stay with us. There's much more Currents coming up.
When we return, some surprising things you may not know about cremation.
The reverence for the body shown in our sacramental life is to be mirrored for our bodies in death.
Welcome back. Well, not too long ago, it was something all but unheard of in the Catholic Church. But now it is commonly accepted. It's a practice that, in fact, is spreading. It's cremation.
But there are still many misconceptions about cremation and a lot of questions, too. So our Natalia Ortiz went in search of some answers. Natalia?
Matt, Francesca, the numbers tell the story. In 1985, less than 15% of people who died in the U.S. were cremated. Now, that's more than doubled. And the Cremation Association of North America predicts that by 2025, more Americans will be cremated than have traditional burials. To get a better understanding of what the Church teaches about this once forbidden practice, I recently sat down with Father Joe Gibino, who teaches systematic theology at St. John's University. Father Joe, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
We're here to talk about Catholic cremation. And cremation, I have done some research, has actually, the number of people who are choosing cremation has gone up according to one of our local funeral homes here in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about why that is and what exactly is cremation, I guess?
Well, there are several factors to why cremation is popular right now. Some is economic. Mm-hmm. It is usually more affordable for a cremation than for a larger, more elaborate funeral. Part is socioeconomic. Some are very aware of the ecology right now, and so cremation seems to be a more ecological choice. And cremation is basically the using intense heat and flame, bodies are turned from our bodily substance into what is called cremains or cremated remains. Mm-hmm. All organic material is consumed by the flame, and then what is left after cooling is collected and placed in a respectable urn or repository.
Okay, so cremation, I think, is still very much misunderstood within the Catholic Church in regards to whether it's allowed or not. In 1963, something changed around the time of Vatican II, and mm-hmm. now it is allowed, but I think a lot of people haven't caught up to that. Explain to us a little bit of the history of cremation within the Catholic Church, why it was not allowed, and why that changed.
Certainly our oldest roots are in the Jewish tradition.
Okay.
And in Judaism, the burning of a body was never permitted. So in imitation of what they knew, our ancestors entombed. And certainly for us, that is also a reflection of the burial of Jesus and his entombment. During the persecution of the martyrs, very often martyrs were set on fire or in the attempt to cremate them to ridicule the notion of the resurrection of the body.
I see.
So from that historical perspective, cremation was never allowed. With the Age of Enlightenment, especially in the 19th century with the rise of materialism and atheism, some atheists promoted cremation as a way of ridiculing Christian faith. So that in 1886, a specific prohibition against cremation was made. In 1963, that prohibition was lifted and cremation was allowed. And then in 1983, in the Code of Canon Law, Canon 1176, states clearly that the Church prefers entombment, but cremation is allowed.
So why would they prefer entombment, even though now cremation is allowed? What's the logic behind that?
It's really a sacramental theology.
Okay.
Our bodies in baptism are made clean of original sin, washed with water, and given the new life of the Holy Spirit, and made temples of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
We're anointed with chrism, and so the body is washed and with oil anointed. Natural symbols, water, oil.
I see.
Also, in the Eucharist, the body is nourished on the body and blood of Christ. And in confirmation, once again, we are anointed as temples of the Spirit. Okay. So clearly, the reverence for the body shown in our sacramental life is to be mirrored for our bodies in death.
I see. So I do want to make clear to the audience that it is allowed, cremation is allowed within the Catholic Church, but what are some of the rules, I guess, for a proper Catholic cremation?
Really, it can fall into three categories. The first category would be cremation after the funeral mass, which would be the preferred model. There, the 3 stations of the funeral ritual are provided. The first station being the vigil, where family and friends can gather to pray for the deceased and show mutual support for one another, followed by the funeral mass, which is usually the rites are provided within the context of the Eucharist, followed by the farewell and final commendation, where at the cemetery we say goodbye to our beloved. All reinforces reverence for the body that we have shown in life to our bodies.
I see.
The second station would be, for many reasons, cremation before the funeral mass, with the funeral mass in the presence of the cremains. There, the ritual is inverted somewhat in that the farewell and commendation should take place before the cremation, and so then the mass in the presence of the cremains placed in an ark or on a table, showing great respect and dignity. The mass is celebrated as usual, but there is no farewell and commendation because it's already been celebrated.
I see.
And the third would be a funeral memorial mass, not in the presence of the cremains at all. And there the norms would be in play. Mostly that would be for any celebration of the Eucharist.
One last question before we wrap up. What about the final resting place for the ashes? Are there any rules for that?
Absolutely. Again, to show the dignity of the human body, once the cremains have been received by the family, they should be properly entombed. That would either be in a family grave or in a mausoleum or columbarium. They should not be kept at home. They should not be divided among family members, nor are they allowed to be scattered in the mountains or in the ocean. They are to be given a final resting place that should also be appropriately marked in a dignified manner.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And for more information regarding the Catholic teaching on cremation, go to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave.
Well, some very interesting information there. I mean, you know, we think, I guess, that it's kind of become sort of commonplace in our society. As you mentioned, the numbers are up as far as people choosing cremation. And, you know, it's interesting to hear as well that the economic situation might be one thing that's sort of leading to that.
Some of the reasons do include economic, you know, although I have to say I spoke to a funeral home locally here in Brooklyn and they said, you know, sometimes even when you cremate, it could be, you know, the costs of the funeral services can kind of go high as well. I mean, depending on what you want. So it's not necessarily cheaper, but it can be. It's an option. Right.
All right, Natalia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Coming up next, a nun for all seasons comes alive on the stage.
It deals with the earth, it deals with healing, it deals with each person seeking the living light within themselves.
Well, when was the last time a cloistered nun from the 12th century became a box office hit? You probably don't know the answer to that question. I know I sure didn't, but it is starting to happen with Hildegard of Bingen, whose story is captivating audiences across the country.
And around the world. Holy Hildegard, as she's known, was a mystic, a composer, and a pioneer, and something of a rebel as well. Now actress Lynn Maxwell has brought her story to life in a one-woman play, and she stopped by to our studios here at Currents recently to talk about Hildegard and her meaning for us today. Lynn, thanks so much for joining us on Currents today.
Thank you, Francesca.
It's so nice to see you in person. I was reading Catholic Digest the other day. You're on the cover, and you are St. Hildegard of Bingen.
I am.
Or Hildegard of Bingen.
Hildegard of Bingen. Holy Hildegard of Bingen.
Holy Hildegard.
Nothing surprised me more than seeing my face on the cover. It was just a complete surprise.
Well, she's a 12th century singing nun. Tell us about her, why her life is so amazing that you were drawn to it, and then why you then chose to do this show exclusively about her that you created.
Well, I found out that here is a woman who lived from 1098 to 1179. That's a long time ago. What does she have to tell us today? Her message of salvation, holistic healing, and greenness, earth, you know, sustainability, is more urgent today than ever. And I say that in the script because people go, so why are we here? Because Hildegard's message is so vital. It deals with the earth, it deals with healing, it deals with each person seeking the living light within themselves.
You wrote this entirely on your own, and you perform everything from medieval instruments. You sing. She, as I mentioned, was a singing nun at the time, an abbess, as they say, correct? So 900 years ago, she's doing things that conventionally women weren't allowed to do. Talk to us about that and how progressive she was.
Well, as a woman, she was not educated in the same way that men were. She came from a very wealthy family of nobility, but women did not receive the education. They didn't learn Latin. They didn't learn all the great books. She picked it all up from somewhere, and her whole life, she had this burden of, I'm not good enough. I'm not a man. I wasn't educated, but I'm going to make this because God has spoken to me, and I have to get my message out. And her message was, clean up your act, church, and clean up your act, people.
Well, interesting that you say that, because she did write some letters of protest about some internal workings of the church that she found to be really offensive, right?
Right. There are like almost 400 letters, extant letters of hers that are in a nice English translation now. So I went right back to those letters, and she wrote 9 books. And how many women do you know from the 12th century that wrote books?
Right. And she wrote about a lot of different subjects, including subjects that are personal to women.
Yes. And how she knew about these things is still a mystery. We don't really know that, but we know that what she wrote was very accurate. So we are drawn to the material and her life and her vitality and her conviction.
What do you think, when you've been performing your show all around the world now at this point, because you've done it here in New York and you continue to do it all around the world, what do you think speaks to the most in the audience? What do they draw out of it? Because many of them perhaps never heard of her before.
Well, I'm amazed. The audience is really moved. People come up to me and they say, oh, thank you for that. I really needed that blessing. I really needed to hear about the Middle Ages because I dream about the time of the Templars, or Hildegard's message to she wrote a letter to the Pope that would singe your eyebrows. It was, and you know, I don't even mention the name of the Pope anymore because it's very timely. Let's just put it that way.
Well, so 900 years ago, she's fighting for rights. She's talking about green, like you say, initiatives, and she's talking about women's issues. She's talking about education. Who might be her parallel today, or somebody that people might be able to identify with today? Or do you think that there's even such a parallel?
I think that her persona, her spirit, is there for every man and woman, because men are drawn to this show too. I'm amazed that when they hear the message, when they hear Hildegard talking about her own fears, her own loss, her own searching, that they go, oh yeah, that I do that, I feel the same way, or I'm looking for God's blessing in that same area. And then I tell them at the end, go forth and let the living light shine in you. And people go, oh yeah. So that's the message.
So really
open up to the light.
So Hildegard's message is to inspire everyone and let everyone open up to the light.
Yes.
And let that light in and share their own light.
Yes.
As you've shared yours with us today here on Currents, we appreciate your time, and certainly we'll put up some more information about your show. And again, if you want to check her out, Lynn Maxwell is in Catholic Digest, the July-August issue. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Francesca.
Lynn has a nice voice. She stopped by here yesterday, and she wrote the whole thing, too. She did the research on her own. She wanted to know more about this woman, and she went out to find it and then brings it as entertainment to the world.
It's amazing, a very amazing story of someone who, of course, as she was saying, a woman who wasn't as educated as a man would have been at that period in time, and yet did all of these things and talked about things that, you know, how did you even have knowledge of, and all this. It's really an amazing story, and obviously something that's reaching a lot of people and touching their hearts too.
And I'll have some more information about it over on our blog, Riding the Wave.
All right, well, that is it for tonight. Now, coming up tomorrow, you will meet a priest fighting to save an important ministry that's saving lives on the streets of LA. In the meantime, though, remember, we're always online. CurrentsNY.net is the website, and you can check us out on Facebook as well.
And if you have an idea for a story, or if you just want to get in touch with us, you can always drop us a line at CurrentsNY.net. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.